Here we are in the Japanese tea gardens in San Antonio, Texas. It's right by our zoo here in Brackenridge Park. This place was a abandoned rock quarry from the San Antonio Cement Company. They used to quarry limestone here, and the city hired a man named Jinga and his family to come here and do something with the eyesore here, and he was a Japanese artist. And they built this real cool stuff. There's gardens in here, and they've got koi in the water. There's some koi, and did a real neat thing here. Well, after World War II, it's called the Japanese Tea Gardens. They changed the name of it to the Sunken Chinese Gardens because of anti-Japanese sentiment. And back in 1983, they changed it back to the Japanese Tea Gardens. Over that hill over there's still a thing called the Sunken Gardens Theater, and it's an amphitheater, and they play rock concerts and whatnot over there. But anyway, these are the Sunken Gardens here, and I'm going to use this as a backdrop to talk about Pearl Harbor. People ask me, did Roosevelt orchestrate Pearl Harbor? The simple answer to that is yes. Probably the best book about this is one by a man named Gary Victor. It's called the Pearl Harbor Myth, and he started out as a skeptic and then really got on board. We had to get into World War II because the people that run the world are basically the royalty of England and their allies, the Schiffs, the Warburgs, the Rothschilds, the international bankers. Well, Hitler was going off the reservation, and so he had to be knocked down. And but we had to get public sentiment behind it, because you can't do a whole lot without public sentiment here in America. We were still hurting after World War I. People lost a lot of people for, was perceived as nothing, no sum gain. And you couldn't the Lusitania wouldn't have done it, an event like that, or even the records, the intercepted message that said that Mexico could start another front at the south. It had to be something traumatic. So the Japanese were super dependent on our oil at the time. They have no oil or coal. That's kind of why they're in trouble with Fukushima now. Basically, 90% of their electricity was provided by nuclear power, and that's what got them in trouble there. So anyway, he cut off the oil, put some banking sanctions against them, and basically forced their hand. Now, his planners, they knew that they were going to seize the Philippines. It was a given they were going to take Wake Island, a bunch of all the islands in between, and as public sentiment stiffened up, they would probably make the stand at Hawaii. They thought maybe Hawaii would get hit, but it would be, as a natural progression, you start, obviously take the stuff nearest to you, and then you move on. There was never any danger of the Japanese landing on mainland, California. It would be a logistic nightmare. Worst case scenario is, well, the best case scenario for the Japanese, they thought maybe they could take the Hawaiian Islands. And to that effect, when they seized the Philippines, they actually printed money up. Let me get situated here. They actually printed money in the Philippines for the Filipinos to use while they occupied it. And here's a picture of it. Here's a certificate of authenticity, and this is the actual money that they had there. It says Government of Japan. Anyway, there's 5 denominations in here. 5 peso. Anyway, it was in pesos, and it says Government of Japan. It's pretty cool looking. Anyway. There's a picture of that. So, back to the story. So they knew they were going to lose the Philippines, and probably Wake Island, maybe Midway, but they would make the stand on Hawaii. So what they did was, it was assumed they would hit them. Oh look, more koi. They're all showing up here. We'll just let this run so you can get a picture of the koi here. Let's go here a little bit. So they were going to give up the Philippines and probably Wake Island. As trying to get away from the people here so they don't freak out about me talking to myself here. The carriers were not in the bay in Pearl Harbor. They were out looking for. They knew the fleet was out there. They didn't know exactly where they were, and they actually thought they might hit Pearl Harbor, but as a do a little bit of damage. They didn't realize they were throwing a haymaker. The Japanese threw the haymaker against the Russian fleet in World War I. The British Special Air Service has their motto is "He who dares wins," and the Japanese took that to heart. So they threw everything they had against the harbor. Now, it was a success, and yet is not as much as it would be apparent. If they would have caught, if there would have been like an hour notice where the ships would have put out to sea, the military channel's done computer simulations and asked experts on it about what would happen if the fleets met, and yeah, they would have taken down a couple of the Japanese fleet, but they would have lost probably about 5 times as many people, and the ships wouldn't have been able to be resurrected. They wouldn't have been prepared for the fight, and it would have been pretty much not as bad as what happened at Pearl Harbor, but they resurrected all but 3 ships in Pearl Harbor. The West Virginia, obviously the Arizona, I believe the other one was the California. You'd have to check that out, but it's kind of like beating up somebody in an emergency room. If you're going to get beat up, that's the place to do it. The average depth of Pearl Harbor was 20 feet below the bow of the ships. Yeah, so they just patched them up and refloated them. Said all but the 3 that they couldn't salvage were in coastal bombardments later on at Iwo Jima and Guadalcanal. The big mistake they made was not hitting the oil up on the hill. They had a tremendous amount of oil stored in storage tanks. The Japanese broke that off, and if they would have hit that, and that's not that they were going to win the war, but they probably could have won Midway, because we would have had to hunker down and just protect Hawaii while they restocked the oil. It probably would have, if they would have hit the oil, it probably would have lengthened World War II by about 2 years, simply because we wouldn't have been able to, Midway we bloodied their nose pretty good. So the onus was on to Germany to save England. But if you could have backed that up 2 months, it would have stopped the progression into North Africa and up the boot of Italy, and eventually it would have pushed back D-Day probably 4 months. Well, what happens if you push back D-Day 4 months? Now you're getting into cold weather, and you can't land an amphibious attack there. So you actually put off the D-Day invasion till the following spring. Well, what happens if you do that? The Germans get more jets online. Maybe they get their atomic bomb. Maybe the Horton brothers had this flying wing. You saw a Hollywood version of it in Raiders of the Lost Ark, that flying wing that they were going to load that Harrison Ford had to fight on with a big German guy. The Horton brothers were engineers in Germany, and they developed this big giant flying wing plane. And what they were going to do is it was going to carry one atomic bomb, and they were going to drop it on New York. They would have just had enough fuel to get there, and then it was thought they would just parachute out and have U-boats pick them up somewhere off the coast. Wouldn't have, I'm not saying it's going to affect the outcome of the war. We still would have won, or the U.S. would still won. Would have cost maybe a couple of 2 or 3 more years, another 2 or 3 more million people dying. Maybe 4. We still would have won. But anyway, there you go. That's my take on Pearl Harbor. Again, Roosevelt there was a lot of reasons he was doing it. Basically, he was told to do it by the powers that be, and also he was in trouble politically. The midterm on his last election was the biggest turnover in congressional history. From Congress turned over Democrat to Republican because of his failed policies. But you don't change presidents at the start of a war. Bush proved that. Although unpopular, he beat Kerry pretty easy. And Roosevelt won re-election, even though a month earlier he was viewed as weak and inefficient, because he was. A little side note, all the gold in Fort Knox was confiscated by FDR by executive order. You had to turn in everything except for a numismatic, like say you had a gold doubloon, keep that. And every once in a while they'll find these Lawton double eagles from 1928 or whatever that somebody hid somewhere so the government couldn't get it. But anyway, he filled up Fort Knox with, and he paid everybody $20 an ounce for it. And as soon as they sealed up Fort Knox, they immediately jacked it up to $32 an ounce, and that's how he paid for the New Deal. And screwed the American public, because we would have come out of the Depression faster if he hadn't done anything. Anyway, that's my take on Pearl Harbor. The biggest false flag in history up until 9/11. Thank you for your consideration, and if you ever get a chance, come check out the Sunken Gardens. It's pretty cool. Nice place to run early in the morning. It's a short course but hard. Thank you for your consideration. Bye.